There are a lot of things about that day that are just burned in my mind. Graveside service, playing Guns N' Roses on the loudspeaker, knocking on heaven's door. This was a deputy who had just rescued or tried to rescue a couple of young girls from a tornado-ravaged mobile home park. One of those girls is buried right next to, within eyesight distance of now his tombstone. Is just a lot of little things that just tore me up. Hadn't experienced that. That was my first encounter with law enforcement trauma. There are a lot of things that go into being a good cop, whether, you're taking care of yourself, whether you're in good physical condition, whether you get good rest, whether you eat right, so many distractions can interrupt that. But the technical capacity of the work is also extremely important. It's a grind. It can be a high-stress environment. It can be a boring, monotonous, low-stress environment. And it can jump back and forth between those two so very quickly. The thing that's different about the Highway Patrol, and I always want to make sure that I emphasize that we're not better. We're just different. And the thing that's different is the way that we prepare. They were an outlet where you could just shut all that off. Son wants to play t-ball. I don't care about a beat assignment. I don't care about the next dope load. I want to go see him play t-ball. I want to watch my little girl try to play soccer, And so, to me, the family was the anecdote.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree, and we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal.
And we can learn from those mistakes.
And together we can bridge the divide.
The Kansas Highway Patrol was forged during one of the darkest chapters in American history. 1933, as the Great Depression tightened its grip across the country, Kansas found itself battling a wave of kidnappings, bank robberies, cattle rustling, and violent crime stretching across lonely highways and rural communities. Fear traveled the back roads as fast as the criminals themselves. In response, the governor assembled a small team of just 10 motor vehicle inspectors, men tasked with standing between chaos and the people they serve. What began as a handful of determined officers patrolling dusty roads soon became something far greater, a symbol of order, courage, and protection during uncertain times. In 1937, the Kansas Highway Patrol was officially established, laying the foundation for generations of troopers who would dedicate their lives to protecting others. From the earliest days of outlaw pursuits and rural patrols to the modern highways of today, the story of the Kansas Highway Patrol is one of grit, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to serve when Kansas needed the most. Today we sit down with Erik Smith, Superintendent of the Kansas Highway Patrol, to talk about that legacy, the responsibility of leadership, and the men and women who continue carrying out this mission today. Colonel Erik Smith, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Dallas.
Thank you. Great place to be.
Yeah, we have a good boss now that you know a little bit about.
I agree with that assessment.
I want to welcome Sergeant Dan Mosier to the mic. He's back on with us. He's co-hosting it.
Good to be here again.
And we're going to jump right into this. I read your bio. It's pretty extensive. You've been in a lot of stuff. You got a long law enforcement career, and now you're the superintendent over the Kansas Highway Patrol. But we're going to work up to that. But I want to start at the beginning.
Okay.
And talk about home life, where you grew up.
Well, I've taken kind of a crazy route to get where I am. I was born in Olds, Alberta, Canada, but I was adopted. I was put up for adoption as a brand new infant, and I was adopted by U.S. parents who were going to Bible college in Canada. I was just an infant again, when we returned to the U.S., and I grew up in a small central Kansas town where my dad was pastor of a very, very small, and by small I mean probably less than 35 people in the Congregation Baptist Church. And so grew up in this central Kansas town, and the evening after I graduated from high school, I moved from this small town to Wichita, and I went to work in a union shop at Boeing Commercial Aircraft.
Yeah, I was reading that it changed your life and career, but you met somebody there that changed your trajectory and what you wanted to do.
Yep. So, growing up in that small town, it was, well, let me back up a little bit, because like people wonder, why did you get adopted by U.S. parents and how did you end up in the U.S.? So after my dad got back from Vietnam in the late 60s, he decided he wanted to go into the ministry. And he and my mom and my oldest sister went to Bible college in Alberta, Canada. And while they were there, for whatever reason, they thought they couldn't have any more kids. So they looked to adopt, and that's how they found me. Turns out that wasn't true, and they went on to have another 2 kids. So I've got a younger brother and a younger sister as well. But and now they're spread out through Missouri and Oklahoma and Kansas. But so no one in my immediate family, or even my extended family, was in law enforcement. That was just kind of something that was a unique interest to me. Growing up dirt poor, I thought then that was probably rather typical, growing up in a single income family where the mother doesn't work outside the home. But that presented some challenges, right? In this small town, being a pastor of a church with a 35-member congregation, that doesn't pay the bills.
No.
And so my dad had to work 2 other jobs on top of that. He worked as a custodian in the high school, and then he worked as an overnight watchman in a boys' home. So he was gone a lot, and he was working hard to make ends meet, and that wasn't easy to make ends meet. So being gone and being broke, that family dynamic was tense. And it wasn't just tense because he was gone and we were broke. That brought a whole nother aspect of stereotype, right? When all the kids you go to school with know that you're getting free lunch at school, when all the parents of the kids that you go to school with see you shopping at the grocery store with food stamps, it drove me to get out. I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to do something more. And that's not casting aspersions or judgment on my family dynamic. It just provided the spark to get out and do more.
It provided motivation to get out of that.
Yep. So when I got out of high school and had the opportunity to move to Wichita, I didn't have money to go to college. And so I thought, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stay out 1 year. I'm going to work, and I'm going to save money, and that's how I'll go to college. So I went to this job training program for sheet metal mechanic, and got out of that class with a certificate and got hired right away at Boeing. And at first I was stoked, right? This is a union job. It was paying probably 3 times the minimum wage.
Big company name. Yeah.
Big company. Like, I'm 18 years old, and I thought, I'm out and I've made it. And living at home made that money even feel bigger. And so that was exhilarating at first. But man, it didn't take but just a few weeks, and that work sucked. Not because it was hard. It wasn't hard work. It wasn't difficult manual labor, but it was monotonous and it was boring. And I wasn't wired like that. So coincidentally, a few months into that job, their contract was up and the union went on strike. And I'm like, man, what am I doing? Why am I being loyal? And so you mentioned kind of a fortuitous chance encounter. They're on strike. I still want to get paid. So I'm picking up some shifts at a gas station, still a full service station back in the day. And so people drive in over the hose, rings the bell. I go out and I wash windows. I fuel up the car. I check the oil.
Make small talk.
That's right. And so there was a police department sergeant who would come rolling through that gas station several times a day. And we became acquainted, and he just chatted me up, and he knew that I was interested in law enforcement, and he knew that I wasn't 21, but, you know, just being a good guy and looking out for the community and caring about young kids. He said, we don't have any job openings, but we do have stuff for people that are under 21. We've got this reserve dispatch program, and we can plug you in and teach you how to dispatch, and we've got an overnight dispatcher that's getting ready to go out on maternity leave, and you can be a reserve dispatcher. And that was intriguing to me, so I went through the little ad hoc training program, and they started plugging me into shifts, and then they got comfortable with my performance, and she went out on maternity leave, and so I started doing full shifts by myself. And it's kind of funny. I quickly realized that this reserve program, that wasn't anything official. That was just a fancy word for free labor.
You're right, yeah. But it got your foot in the door.
It got my foot in the door, and it really tickled that itch just a little bit more. Like, I don't care about this. You know, I'm 18. This is the late 80s. I'm making $35,000 living at home. I didn't care about that. This is what I wanted to do. Working in the middle of the night, taking emergency calls, interacting with cops and firefighters and paramedics. This is what I need to be doing.
Well, you knew your work was actually it was a cog in the wheel to help people. I mean, it is crucial. Dispatching is a crucial part of law enforcement.
Yeah.
First responding.
It is. It's the lifeline often to somebody who needs help, and they don't know. They don't have anyone else to call, and they call you, and it makes you feel useful. It gives you a sense of purpose to be able to provide them with the help. And at that time, my only capacity and my only ability was to be that lifeline. I knew that someday I wanted to be the one answering those calls, but I wasn't there yet.
I want to take you back to May 12th, 1991. Can you kind of walk us through that incident and talk about the impact on you?
Yep. So kind of gives me a little bit of chills to think about that. But so this was a Sunday night, and I was dispatching. So I'd gone from reserve. I'd quit my job at Boeing. I took on a full-time position, and I worked what they called a swing shift. So it was really tough. I worked midnights on Saturday, Sunday. Then I was off on Monday, Tuesday, and then I worked evenings the next 2 days, and then I had a day shift with an 8-hour turnaround. So I worked all 3 shifts during the course of a 5-day period. This was a Sunday night, and I had been at an after-church activity, and I was taking a young girl home, lived in South Wichita. So after our church activity, I took her home, and I dropped her off. And I needed to rush back home to put my uniform on. And so it was shortly after 10 p.m. I dropped her off. She lived just west of 31st and Seneca. And the part that's chilling to me is I leave her house, I turn east on 31st, and I stop at the light at Seneca. On my left is an Albertsons grocery store. That doesn't mean anything for about another 30 minutes. I go home, change my clothes, get into my uniform, and I go to the police station, and it's chaos at the police station. What happened? Well, there's a deputy, and he worked down in the south end of the county, so he had often come in. He worked the evening shift, and he had often come in towards the end of his shift at shift change, and so I would see him. I remember he would come in and pick up a newspaper, and we were acquainted. I didn't know him. I knew his name. I couldn't tell you if he knew my name, but I knew who he was. He had been shot. It was shift change, and he was headed to the squad room. He was done with his shift, and he pulled up next to a van, and he recognized the passenger as somebody who was wanted on a parole violation. He was an absconder. So he pulled the car over. They pulled into the Albertsons parking lot. He engaged the passenger. He was getting him out of the vehicle. When he got him out of the vehicle, the passenger pulled a .357 revolver. They had a little bit of struggle, and during the struggle, the gun went off, and it shot the deputy in the upper femur, like pelvic groin area. He went to the ground, drew his service pistol. The agency had just transitioned from revolvers to Glocks. Chris had forgot to chamber around when he seated his mag before the shift, and the gun went click. And the guy who had shot him and thought the fight was over was turning around to go get in his van when he heard the gun go click. And he comes back and puts a bullet in his forehead. Just executes him right there in the parking lot of that Albertsons grocery store that I was just sitting at the light at. 20, 30 minutes earlier. So, like for me, there were a lot of connections, right? I was just there at that parking lot. I knew who this guy was. It represented an assault on law enforcement. It made me pause for a minute and reconsider what I was doing in this field. But it also was my first opportunity to go to a police funeral. And, man, that tore me up that day, going to that funeral. I remember there are a lot of things about that day that are just burned in my mind. Graveside service, playing Guns N' Roses on the loudspeaker, knocking on heaven's door. You know, this was a deputy who had just rescued or tried to rescue a couple of young girls from a tornado-ravaged mobile home park. One of those girls is buried right next to, within eyesight distance of now his tombstone. Is just a lot of little things that just tore me up. Hadn't experienced that. That was my first encounter with law enforcement trauma.
Yeah, and it also it shows how fragile everything is, and especially when it comes to this profession.
Yep.
And how it could turn on a dime.
Yep. I was also struck by just the magnitude of the ceremony, the pomp and the
powerful.
circumstance. Yeah. Just on one hand, there was this inhumane execution, and then on the other hand, there's this massive ceremonial response. Just that dichotomy of that struck me.
And an outpouring of support.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, I always say after a funeral, I say, they're our law enforcement funerals are awe-inspiring. They're amazing. And if there's never occasion for another one, I'll be immensely happy the rest of my life.
100%.
Definitely wasn't the case for you and law enforcement funerals.
No.
That was the beginning. And I could actually say, I could tell this happened in 91. Here we're in 2026, and I could see it still.
Yep.
So can you tell us about Sedgwick County? So,
yeah, the department that this guy worked for, Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, is where I ended up going to work. It was my dream job, little poor kid riding a bicycle, playing chips with my sister, and now here I am. I could simultaneously, like I talked about earlier, I could help those people in trouble, whether that trouble was big or small, didn't matter. I could be creative, and but then at the same time, the other intriguing and thing that drew me was you could put bad guys in jail. So you can help people, you can put bad guys in jail, and I felt useful, I felt needed, and I thought that it contributed to the welfare of the community, and I thought it was important work. So, and I didn't care what I did, right? Early on I worked midnights, and in that scenario I kind of gravitated towards DUI enforcement, and they were a dime a dozen. You could get two or three a night if you paid attention. If you wanted to grind, they were everywhere, and they were deadly. And I felt challenged by the fact that while it seemed like simple traffic work, you had to get really good at it if you wanted to defeat some of those big time lawyers that would drag you into court in the middle of your night in daytime,
right.
and they would just grind you up and spit you out, and a drunk could go free. So to me, figuring out how to overcome that and how to do cases the right way. There was a defense attorney there that he was the king of DUI defense, and I thought when I got to the point where I could beat him and he would plead, I was on to something there. So
there is an art to that. There is an art to testifying, preparing a case, and testifying. Not preparing a case to get somebody in jail, but to prepare a case to prosecute them.
Yep.
That's what the end goal should be.
Yep.
And going against a great defense attorney, I know what that feels like, and it is very rewarding when you can you match wits. It is playing chess, and and you're hoping they're playing checkers.
Right.
Yeah, you got to see where they're trying to go before they do it. What was it? Ken Penrod always said, "Don't prepare a case for trial, prepare it for appeal." Too. You got to think seven steps beyond where you are tonight. You think, I can get this person in jail. Well,
that's good advice.
That's not the point.
It is very good advice. But yeah, it is. Some of these defense attorneys, and I know you've gone against a lot of good drug defense attorneys,
Yep.
and some of those guys are pretty slick, and a lot of it, they have very shiny smoke and mirrors,
Yep.
and that they use, but you got to counter it, and
Yep.
you have to do the documentation. The night of the arrest is one of the most crucial things you can do to help you a year or two down the road when you're going to court.
It's probably the foundation of good law enforcement. It's not. There are a lot of things that go into being a good cop, whether you're taking care of yourself, whether you're in good physical condition, whether you get good rest, whether you eat right, whether you so many distractions can interrupt that. But the technical capacity of the work is also extremely important. And so I moved on. I got off the midnight shift. I had the opportunity to go to an evening shift, and that kind of worked a little bit better for my family life with my young kids at home and my wife's work schedule. So then when I went to the evening shift, I kind of gravitated towards criminal interdiction, working on the highways in the daylight out in the western part of the county where, US 54 was a major thoroughfare coming from El Paso right through Wichita. And we had good opportunities to sit and watch and observe traffic behavior. And the key to interdiction is just volume of stops. Stop everybody for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean you got to cite them, but stop everybody for everything and engage everyone, and you'll come across dope and criminal activity. So I gravitated towards that on the evening shift.
What kind of drug trends were you seeing up there in Kansas?
So the things that were being smuggled was marijuana and cocaine, and that was, but it was also kind of the advent of the homegrown meth lab, the country cooks, the 3,2 meth, where the precursor chemicals that are available in a gas station, the pseudoephedrine pills, and then you go to the country to the co-op and you steal a gallon of anhydrous ammonia and you go do the cook in the trunk of your car in some farmer's barn before it blows up, and you get this crappy, nasty chemical powder or shards of junk, and then crush it up and you smoke it in a pipe, and that was a scourge for a while.
Were y'all seeing much heroin come through there?
No.
Okay.
We were not.
It is interesting how that different parts of the country have different epidemics.
Yep.
So
Sedgwick County in the early 90s, was there still a lot of lore of the BTK? And I think he had stopped his rampage by the late 80s, early 90s, but I'm sure that there was still that pall in the air kind of.
Oh, I didn't think of that, but I remember as probably third grade, our mobile home, this is before my dad took that pastorate job, and we lived in just rural Wichita, and we had a burglary at our trailer house, and there were some connections, and I just remember my mom being scared that this was BTK.
Yeah.
It wasn't, but
you were on edge back then.
Yes,
yeah.
we were on edge, and that was in the late 70s probably. So, and then he didn't get caught until
30 years later.
I had left. I
2005.
I was a DEA agent up in Minnesota, and I saw that breaking news, and I'm seeing all these cops that I know. A couple of them are still very good friends of mine that I have lunch with about once a month, but they were on that BTK task force. They put the handcuffs on him that day. So
that's phenomenal. And I mean, I read a book on that guy, and I've seen several documentaries, and who knows if he would have just stayed hidden and just not come back out, if he would have gotten caught. But technology had caught up to him, and it got him.
Well, he wanted to go active again, so he thought he was smarter than everybody, and he started sending hints on who his next victim was, and he started sending that to one of the news stations.
Well, it was interesting. I remember one of the Polaroid photos he sent to the news station. It was an actual Polaroid that would only have been taken. It wasn't like a crime scene photo. It was taken. You can tell it was taken by him at the scene.
Yep.
And that was, and I remember, I know a floppy disk was kind of like help catch him.
Yeah, there was data. He'd tried to overwrite the data, but they still figured out where where that had gone to a church, and then it was him, and they traced it back, and they pulled him over, and they said something like, "You know what we're hearing?" He goes, "Pretty good idea."
It's a hell of a case. Yeah. I mean, it's. I mean, I've read the book was amazing that I read on it, but it is. He's one of those infamous, legendary in those realms serial killers that took a long time to catch.
Yep.
But prolific at evil.
for sure.
Can you talk about Deputy Kevin Easter?
So Kevin was the next cop funeral that I went to, and it was it was 5 years, almost 5 years later, but this one was different because a couple things. Kevin was my classmate. We had a small class, so we had a combined academy. Wichita PD and Sedgwick County Sheriff had a combined academy. We did a lot of our training segregated, and then we did some of it combined, but our academy class kind of matriculated along the same beginning, midpoint, benchmark testing, and graduation point. So, but our class in the county was small. I think there was 7 or 9 of us. Kevin was one of them. And he was a shift partner of mine midnights. And he was at my wedding. And then you tack on top of that, my son was less than 10 days old. I just had my first kid. In fact, I was home that night, January 8th I can't remember if I was really technically on paternity leave or if had not come back to work yet or if I was just on a day off, but I remember I was home. And 10:45, 11 o'clock at night, there was a knock on my door, and it was a friend of mine who was a patrol supervisor in the suburb that I lived in. And I remember I was holding my baby kid, my baby son, when I answered the door, and Mark said, "Kevin's been shot." And I handed my son off, and I got dressed, and I went to the squad room and picked up a patrol car and said, "How can I help?" And the boss said, "I just need you to cover calls. We've got enough people at the hospital. We don't need anybody at the hospital. We need people to cover calls." So I did, and kept hearing updates on the radio. What I remember, and this was I didn't know this till later, but what I remember about that night was it was kind of my first natural response to trauma. I had stopped a car in the Boeing complex, big, factory complex in the south part of town, and I stopped a car. I don't remember why I stopped it, but there was a couple of young kids in the car, and they had smart mouths, and so I was on edge, and I'm dealing with these jackwagons, and one of my other buddies, who I knew was at the hospital, he told another deputy, "Hey, switch over to common," which meant he had something he wanted to say. And so I backed away from the car where I was dicking with these kids, and I switched over, and he said, "Kevin just passed. The doctor just pronounced." And man, I remember walking back into that car just losing my temper on that driver. The anger just boiled over, Similar response a few days later at the funeral. I couldn't bring myself to walk by the casket. But then we went from the church to the graveside service, and we had the graveside service, and I remember walking away, and seeing some of my other shift partners, and my response was, it was terrible. But collectively, I think what we all wanted to do was just get out of here, go back on the street, and let's mess with somebody. I think what I wanted at the time was revenge. Wildly misplaced, right? The violator was in jail, but somehow I felt like it's these people out there. And to me, that was a turning point. This is us versus them.
Of course.
And the public needed to pay somehow. So fortunately for me, the very next day, a news crew wanted to come out and ride. And my supervisor thought, you're active. You knew this guy. Let's send this news crew out with you. And while I hated that, it was probably a good thing because I needed to put on a different face, right? I was angry, and that forced me to put on a facade. So I talked about all the good things about Kevin. I talked about how difficult it is for us to do what we do, and they wanted to film me stopping another car, and they filmed this. I've still got the videotape. They've got this interaction between me and a violator, and I'm prim and proper, and I'm professional. And in hindsight, that was probably a good thing that they did that to me, because it yanked me back in line and got my mind right. So,
well, but you had that mask, but on the inside you were fuming.
Yep.
And crumbling.
Yep. I thought I wanted to quit. I remember talking to a friend of mine, and my kid was 10 days old. This sacrifice ain't worth it.
Right.
I thought. And so, anyway, but again, and the culture at the time was, all right, it's over. Let's move on. Let's go back to work. So that's what I did.
It's like a soldier mentality.
Yep.
You pack it away and move on to the next incident, the next mission, the next trauma.
Well, even the way they treated you that night, this is your buddy, your classmate, and hey, what can I do? Where you really need to be is down there with the family, and they say, well, go shag calls. It's kind of like it's over. You need to go on to the next thing. And it wasn't over. That was.
And oh, by the way, go show the news crew how resilient we are.
Yeah.
So, we haven't dealt with the trauma.
It was bizarre.
Well, and back then though, it just wasn't. It wasn't a thing. It was such. It was. I'm not even going to say it was a back burner approach to taking care of our people. It just wasn't thought of. And it goes from generations of law enforcement in America doing it this way. I'm looking at the date. I hired on in '97, and I remember hiring on and here in DPD, and kind of the running joke was, you're not a real cop until you've had 2 divorces and stuff like that. I'm like, well, and thinking back now, looking at it now, I'm going, there's nowhere in society should that be celebrated because of what just a divorce does to several people, including yourself. Or I remember how bad people would, used to drink back then.
Yep.
It was a joke. It was also funny. It was treated like it was a joke.
Right. And look how many lives have been ruined over that. And I think it goes back to not processing this trauma.
Yeah.
Not just these. You're talking about losing a friend and losing people you know and respect, and just the symbol of this profession. Losing somebody that wears the badge like you. That is one thing. But that doesn't even count all the daily grind of dealing with other people's grief and violence.
Sure.
And we've come a long way, and thankfully, but we got a lot more work to do.
We do. At least we recognize where the progress needs to be made.
Yes, sir. Well, you just talked about January 8th, 1996. Now here we are at April 18th, 1997. There's more trauma heaped on you and your path in law enforcement.
Yep. So it was just a little over a year later. There's an unincorporated neighborhood. Again, describing kind of South Wichita. I talked about the Boeing complex, and just adjacent to the Boeing complex, across the state highway, was a low-income housing project. It was a bunch of small, very, very small, probably 800 or 900 square foot, 3-bedroom homes, and they were all constructed in the 40s to accommodate the war production. Boeing was building military airplanes. We needed to provide housing for all of these people who are working in the factory building these airplanes, and so this housing project, it's called Oaklawn. And so you fast forward 30, 40 years, and these are now just housing projects. They're no longer used for housing the war machine. It's Section 8 housing and very low income rentals, and a lot of socioeconomic problems that led to a lot of law enforcement contacts in this neighborhood. So there was this house, and we probably got called there legitimately 3, 4, 5 times a day. First shift would have a couple calls. Second shift might have a call. Third shift would certainly have a call or two. It was just a repeat frequent flyer. And I had a records clerk riding as an observer with me that day, and I got a drunk and went to the jail and processed this DUI and booked the guy into jail. And the records clerk and I walk out into the Sally Port, and I'm just getting in my car, getting ready to leave the jail, and I hear a deputy come up on the air screaming, "We need help. The Sarge has been stabbed. Get EMS here now. He's code red." And he just kept screaming the same thing over and over again. And I was the senior lead worker. The supervisor was the Sarge he was talking about. And what had happened was 3 deputies and a supervisor had got dispatched to a disturbance with this guy. I'm not going to say his name, but he had some developmental disabilities. He had probably some psychological things wrong with him. Big family. Anyway, the sergeant supervisor, Ken Snyder, was the first one to the door. He walks inside and he encounters this violator, who at the front door kind of turns and runs away through a very small living room, through a very small galley kitchen, and to the back door. What Snyder didn't see is that as he ran through the kitchen, he grabbed a kitchen knife. And as he gets to the back door and he's trying to get out the door, Sarge goes hands on, just grabs him by the shoulders, and the violator turns around just instantly and just plunges that knife into just the lower part of his neck, right above his collarbone. And that's what caused the deputy to come up on the air screaming. It's probably a good 10 to 12 minute drive from the jail to that house. I made it less than 5, I'm sure. One of the things I remember thinking as I'm pulling into the neighborhood and getting around the corner to pull up the house is my brakes are going to fail. They were hot. I could smell them. That's something weird that's just burned in my mind, is the smell of the brake pads on that Chevy Caprice. The next thing that I see was 2 of the deputies struggling with this violator. They've got him in handcuffs, but he's wrestling. They're struggling to get him out into the car. So I jump out and I meet them in the yard, and they said, "He's in the back. He's in the back." So I rush into the house. It don't take 8 or 10 steps to get from the front door through the kitchen around to the back door. And I saw him laying there. And he was kind of just crumpled. He wasn't laid out. He was just kind of crumpled. He was laying on top of a dog dish, for the dog food. And the dog food was just full of blood. He had bled out. I could tell he was probably gone just by his color. But I had to get him out to where the incoming paramedics could work on him. So I drug him out of that laundry area, through the kitchen, back into the living room where we could. And just as I'm getting him laid out and spread out to start life-saving measures on him, the paramedics are walking in, and they immediately take over. And so I step aside to try to secure the scene and make sure the rest of the family members are out of the house. And so they transported him. It didn't take very long for them to pronounce him once they got him to the hospital. But the thing about that night that I remember is I ended up working a double into the rest of the night, just trying to cover down on everything that needed handled, being one of the lead workers. And 6 o'clock the next morning, when I'm finally relieved and ready to go home, I hear there's a country radio station, KFDI, in Wichita, and they do the best news coverage. They do breaking news coverage. They have reporters come to every scene. It must be like little scanner junkies, but man, they report on everything, and they do a good job, and they usually get it right. And I'm dead tired driving home when I hear KFDI talk about a Sedgwick County Sheriff's deputy who was killed in Oaklawn this morning. And I knew, like, my father-in-law is a farmer a couple counties away, and that's what they do. They get up early and they go check on the cows, and they go to coffee, and they listen to KFDI. And I thought, man, they're going to be worried. So I got a hold of my wife and said, just call them and give them the heads up that it's not me. I'm okay. So anyway, that was just yet one more exposure.
Yeah, one more. So looking back now, how are you processing all of this years now, stacking up?
So, in terms of the way either people individually or the agency collectively looked at mental health care, I really don't even think that it was a blip on anyone's radar. I think they knew you saw things, right? They they knew that it affected you, but it didn't have a label. They couldn't define it. They couldn't identify it. And if there was any label that you would attach to somebody who showed anything, the label would have had a negative connotation, right? It would have been weakness, or it would have been soft. Yeah. You're soft. And so, there was an anecdote to that. Choir practice, you talked about alcohol. Choir practice was supposed to solve everything. Well, growing up like I did, alcohol was taboo for me, and so I wasn't too inclined to indulge. But I knew now I was different. I knew something. I didn't know what the label was, and it was really probably many, many years later. I think for me, it might not be historically accurate, but when soldiers started coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they started labeling things PTSD.
Yes.
That's for me. That's the first time that there was a label that I knew affected me.
And it made sense.
Yep.
Because you after a while you become more immersed in a fog.
Yeah.
And you go through the motions, and you think there was like a part of you that was thinking, because now this is your norm, what's next?
Yep. Yeah. Well, you kind of, in the interim, you become a little bit desensitized, and that desensitization manifests itself very negatively in a lot of ways, like my behaviors, my sleep cycle. I knew I had a short temper. Mm-hmm. Didn't know why. I knew I couldn't sleep. Thought it was shift work. It was really probably at that time, and these have gone away, but nightmares, just goofy nightmares about your trigger pull went from 2.5 pounds to 17 or 18 pounds.
I've had that. Yeah, you're mashing it. It won't
go down. Yeah. And if you can finally grab it with both hands and get that trigger pulled, the projectile just kind of splurts out the end and falls to the ground. That is nightly.
Isn't that is strange? I myself have had that same version of that dream and that gun. I've talked to other people that have had the same. It's fascinating how and why. I know that there is some science that is beyond my comprehension that could explain that, but
it's got to mean something.
It means something.
It's a theme.
It is a theme, and it's it's kind of a common theme, honestly. Yeah, very interesting. We have a point to all of these incidents, and because it changed. Well, obviously it changed who you are, and it also changed who you became. And here's yet another one. November 4, 2000, Sergeant Jack Galvan. Can you talk about that?
Yep. So completely different scenario. Completely different set of circumstances. I've seen now 2 shot to death. Now I've got 1 stabbed to death. And I'd gone through motorcycle school, always looking for ways to expand my, capabilities and get just more exposure to different things in law enforcement. And I thought that motors would be fun to do. And so I went to motor school, and we had a small motor unit. PD had a little bit bigger of a motor unit, and we did a lot of our stuff together, particularly the dog and pony shows. If there was an event or a parade or an escort, we would all do it together. And Jack was the sergeant, one of the supervisors in the PD's motor unit. So I rode with Jack on the motor escort for Ken Snyder's funeral. Anyway, Jack was a motor guy. He was also part of the PD's bomb squad. And in late October, they were doing a training exercise, and part of their training exercise really was to dispose of some of the very large firework ordinances from the 4th of July. And so part of their training regimen was to transport and store them. Part of their training regimen was to move them from storage to a detonation pit. He was down in the detonation pit, and they had an accident, and one of those ordinances went off, and he was severely, severely burned. And he lived for several days in the burn unit, and then he passed November the 4th, 2000. So here I am, going from riding assignments with him, riding parades, riding the last cop funeral. Now I got to ride for his funeral. Now I got to ride escort in his funeral. And you know, the thing that struck me really was just seemed like the hits keep coming. The good guys keep dying.
Right.
There's no other way to put it.
In different ways.
Yep.
You know, I mean, life was getting creative in the way that the good guys were leaving.
Yep. You know, Chris Willems was killed by a parole absconder. At some level, you tell yourself, bad guys do bad things and good guys pay for it. Kevin Easter, 14-year-old Asian gangbanger. A different aspect of society that's gone wrong and that's failed, and somebody dies for it. Ken Snyder, that was completely a social family dysfunction with a touch of mental illness. Now, this is just a freaking accident, right? But it doesn't matter.
Still a lot taken.
Yep.
So how I got to ask you this now? How was this affecting home life? You know, you sleeping wasn't good. The temper was shorter. Looking back, how was this affecting you from a home life standpoint?
You know, that's probably a better question for my wife, because I know she noticed. But I gotta say that that's probably the only thing that helped. Having a stable home life, having a good marriage, a supportive wife, and a couple of young kids that kind of gave you, something to
purpose.
Yep. Yeah. They were an outlet where you could just shut all that off. Son wants to play t-ball. I don't care about a beat assignment. I don't care about the next dope load. I want to go see him play t-ball. I want to watch my little girl try to play soccer, And so, to me, the family was the anecdote.
That was your happy place.
Yep.
But you and I both know many that did not have that.
Yep.
They didn't have anything to fill that void.
That's right.
And that's when you see the alcoholism. That's when you see the risky behavior.
Yep.
And that's when you see not only the professional life crumbling, but the personal life crumbling.
Yep. That's why for me, relational wellness is one of the priority pillars of the Kansas Highway Patrol's wellness program, is because that's just another stressor that if you can solidify it and you can grow it and make that flourish, it actually has the polar opposite effect, right? Because a bad family life is just going to be another stressor, another distractor, something else to add to the flames, fan the flames, and burn you down faster. Or if you grow it and it's healthy, it becomes your outlet. It's got healing power.
No, because the family, in theory, some people that they don't go home as much.
Yep.
But in theory, they're the people that you go home to after carrying all of this grief and violence and trauma, and they're usually affected the most.
Well, they are. They're the ones who are on the receiving end of my temper, or being withdrawn and being distant, or my wife always, she still to this day, why are you so crabby? Because I'm not crabby. My face is just built that way. Just they see it. It's written all over your face, and you don't even have to say anything, and they know that the tensions are high.
Yeah, well, they're the ones that spend the most amount of time with you, and they're the ones that we all wear masks. We're doing this job, and we all have to grin angrily through a fake smile, dealing with some of the people that we have to deal with and some of the situations we deal with, and we have to behave a certain way. We can't go. It's easier to go off on outside of the work, right? It's because when my family, they know me, they love me, they care about me, and they're going to accept my bad days more than a news camera or a body cam footage of me going off.
Yep. It's completely unfair, but you feel a little bit more latitude to act a certain way at home, right, wrong, or indifferent. Well, it's straight up wrong, but you feel a little bit more comfort and a little bit more latitude to act out in that way than you do around your peers at work or that you do in public, whether you're at church or at a ball game or whatever. So they see the worst for sure.
Absolutely. Erik, so 2002, you made a big move. You've kind of walked us through a lot of violence and trauma and grief, and you already had an interest and a knack for the drug world, because everybody, any law enforcement officer, whether they like to dabble in that type of work or go after the dopers or not, there is usually a nexus to most crime when it comes to the drug trade. And in 2002, you had a big move and you took your talents to the DEA.
I did. Big move. Thought for sure that that's what I wanted for several years. In fact, I was in a 3-year hiring process. It took me a long time to go through the process. At the time, there was a hiring freeze, and then maybe they just thought that I was lower on the competitive list, maybe. And then I found out in January of 2002, I got a call from the DEA recruiter in the St. Louis division, and he said, "Hey, my name's Phil Jacobs, and I'm your new recruiter, and I found your file in Rick Bauer's desk." Rick Bauer had committed suicide, and that's one of the reasons why that file languished in his desk for some time. Another interesting twist.
Yeah.
A guy had some health problems, a chronic diagnosis, and was in a lot of pain, and decided to leave. So didn't know it, but that impacted my trajectory as well. So anyway, after 3 years and really a lot of nothing, thinking I was getting the Heisman from DEA, Phil Jacobs called and said, "Your eligibility for your job application is coming to an end this summer. You're going to expire. Do you want in? You still want in, or you want to let it go?" I said, I think I want in. Now, by this time, I had finished a 2-year assignment as a DEA Task Force. I'd now promoted to a supervisor. I'd been back out on the road. I'd been brought into the courthouse and was supervising an investigations unit. A lot of things had changed. I was number one on the lieutenant's list. I was probably one of the next to get promoted again. But what I had been trying for 3 years was now right in front of my face. Do I want to try this or not? And I decided I did. So for the next 6 months, I renewed everything that I needed to renew in that application process: the PT, the psych, the medical, the everything. Renewed it, and in June, they said, "Can you start? We got an academy in 2 weeks. Can you start?" Look, that's not enough time for me to pack up, move across country, leave my wife and my 2 kids behind while I'm in the academy. They said, "Well, if you can't do this, I need you to commit to the August class." Okay, I'm committed. I'm in. So August 2002, I left the sheriff's office, moved to Quantico, and for the first several weeks, I regretted making the move. It was just tough being away. To think of what I had given up, to think of the career that I had just walked away from to start all over. The other thing was, for the first several weeks, I had no idea where I was going. They didn't tell you what your duty station was going to be. And I found out on week 5 that I was going to Minneapolis, Minnesota.
So how did you react to that? Because I'm curious also how Minnesota was at that time.
Well, actually, Minnesota was great at that time. It was a lot different then than it is now, and the way that it had, after George Floyd, totally different. It was in my top 3. Our class of 45 or 50 students were given a list to choose from, and most of those were East Coast, West Coast, big city, or Southwest border. And so for me, I picked Houston, number 1, Detroit, number 2, and Minneapolis, number 3. Probably wasn't a lot of education or analytics going into those decisions, but I got my number 3 pick.
A lot of action-packed places, though.
There were.
Especially when in the drug trade.
There were. And Minnesota seemed to be at the far end of that. I didn't pick it to escape work. I really kind of picked it for its adjacency and proximity to get back home. Houston was number 1. It was about a 10-hour drive south.
Yeah.
And Minneapolis was about a 10-hour drive north. And then I had some distant family in Detroit. So that's kind of what drove those decisions.
Okay. So starting off in Minnesota, what were you seeing when you first got out there as far as the drug trends?
Well, in terms of a place to live, it was very nice. It was tough in the winter, but there were 6 good months out of the year, and it was a very nice place to live. Of course, you have the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. Very, very different culture, very, very different feel. Very, very diverse in terms of, like, in the work that I was doing at the time. Minneapolis was more like inner city, gang, drug, urban type violence, whereas St. Paul, a lot of Hispanic influence in St. Paul, and a lot of your higher level cartel activity occurred on that side of the metro. So I learned a lot. I learned very, very quickly, but very, very positive experiences with interagency partners, with federal prosecutors, figuring out how to do things like wiretaps. I got into doing wiretaps, and I did a lot of them very, very quickly. And like I said, a lot of support from the interagency and from federal prosecutors. The trends that we saw, big marijuana. Like for a kid from Wichita, seeing a tractor trailer with 3,000 pounds of marijuana was a big deal to me. It was also a big deal because it's very low overhead, very high profit. So it generated cash like crazy. And so one of the things that became very, very apparent, and it's still true to this day, despite what you're going to hear, in the popular narrative, marijuana fuels a lot of violent crime.
Absolutely.
You can go to a lot of inner city gang violence type shootings, and in the late 80s, you might blame it on crack cocaine, but any place else, there's going to be a marijuana trade nexus to a majority of that violence. So the other thing too is meth. At that time, I talked about the 3-2 meth earlier in the broadcast, where people would grow it at home. State legislatures around the country put controls on precursors. They put pseudoephedrine behind lock cabinets. A lot of the precursor chemicals became controlled in the United States, and it became very hard to manufacture meth. That's when the Chinese started shipping those precursor chemicals to Mexico, and Mexico started making it in precursor labs, very, very cheap, and then smuggle it into the United States along some of their own old cocaine routes. Those old cocaine routes became methamphetamine lab routes. It became much more lucrative for the Mexican cartels, because what the Mexicans used to do with cocaine, they would take cocaine from South America either on consignment, or they had to front money for those cocaine loads. Now the Mexicans were in charge of their own manufacturing, their own production. They didn't owe the Colombians anything. This was their product. And so they began manufacturing in these super labs in Mexico, importing it into the United States, and the purity levels, I talked about 3-2 meth, like 3-2 beer, very low quality, very low quantity of alcohol. This stuff was initially in the high 80s and low 90s, and then within a year and a half, it became 98, 99% pure methamphetamine, which means that in Minneapolis, Minnesota, if you could get a kilo of or a pound of 98, 99% pure meth, you could step on that 4 or 5 times and still make a killing.
Quadruple
your profit by slinging that on the street. So those were the trends. That was the advent of ice methamphetamine.
That's like Heisenberg ratios.
Yep, exactly.
Familiar.
Yep.
Man, that's crazy.
How far out was the jurisdiction that you worked?
So, federal, nationwide. So I was assigned to the Minneapolis-St. Paul District Office, which covered the entire state of Minnesota. It covered. Although there were subordinate offices, it covered North Dakota, South Dakota, and then our division headquarters were in Chicago. So, pretty large multi-state region, and the whole idea really is to initiate those cases in the Minneapolis or St. Paul area, but then work those cases up through the source of supply, through the network, through the transportation and smuggling system and try to take out as much of the network as you can, whether it's production, transportation and smuggling, wholesale distribution, retail distribution, the monetary exchange and the money laundering, the money smuggling, the repatriation of money back into Mexico. All of that was really kind of your goal in a case like that.
You talked about working with the local authorities and the state authorities. How crucial is that to an investigation?
It's an absolute. I've been in a lot of offices around the country, some good, some not so good, and I can tell you that the ones that thrive and are the most successful are the ones that don't see the difference between your badge and my badge. It doesn't matter whether you're a task force officer or whether you're just a partner on a local narcotics crew. It doesn't even matter if you wear another federal badge with another set of authorities like the FBI or HSI or ATF. If you can just keep a couple things in mind. Number one, drive in your lane and do it well. Also, you're not better. You're just different. You come from a different set of backgrounds and trainings and experiences, but we all want the same thing. And you got to be a good teammate. If you can't be humble and be a good teammate and just say, this is what I have to offer, and I'm going to do it at the highest level, everything else is going to fall into place. At the line level, you can't be worried about who's taking credit for what stat, who's taking credit for what seizure, who's processing what bundle of cash for equitable sharing. That bosses can work that out and figure that out. Just do the job, bring all you've got, do it at the highest level. And that's what gets lost when partnerships break down and certain three-letter agencies think that they're all that, and you got to do it our way or no way. Never works.
Yeah, and we all want obtain the same goal in the mission, complete the mission. Yep. But you get egos, factored in there that kind of can devolve any relationship.
That was something that was. I think it helped me later on in my career. In fact, it still helps me to this day. But having been a TFO and thinking from my perspective that TFOs work harder than the feds, now I'm a Fed, and I don't want the TFOs to outwork me. I was aware that there was this viewpoint that they did most of the work for half of the pay, and now I didn't want to be viewed as by my new TFO partners in Minnesota. And now I'm the Fed. I wasn't going to be outworked. So it was very important for me to bring that same work ethic and that same drive to the federal side of things. Now that I'm done and now that I'm back in the state system, there would easily be a tendency for your chiefs and your sheriffs to say, well, you're from the state. Just like they always used to say, you're a Fed. All talk, no walk. You got a big hat, you got a pretty uniform and a pretty car, but where are you when I need you? It's very important to be cognizant of, we're not better, we're just different. And you better be the first one there. You better work all day, and you better be the last one gone.
Your work ethic, it sounds pretty incredible. Looking back at your father and his work ethic, do you think that had a huge impact on how you approach work?
100%. He did what needed to be done. Didn't know what the definition of a sick day was. Ain't nobody got time for that, right? Because you're not going to eat if you're not going to work. And for me, I wasn't worried about eating. I just didn't want to be out hustled. I didn't want to be outworked. That's your reputation, right? That's your name. That's your brand. And if you're cutting corners and slipping out early, and if you say you're going to do something, or if you say, okay, I'm from the DEA and I'm here to help, what does that mean? If you say that you are going to support cases financially, if you say you're going to support it with manpower, if you say you're going to work the overnight shift on surveillance, if you say that you're going to do the weekends in the wire room, do it. Be willing to be there right alongside with your partners, because otherwise you're not a good teammate.
Reputations are so important in just life and just this profession, because your reputation should walk in the door before you walk in. And a bad reputation is really hard to shake. Yep. And I've said this before on the show, that your reputation isn't what you think of yourself. It's what the majority of people that have worked with you, what they've taken away from that experience.
That's right.
It's crucial. And young officers out there, young agents, you walk in the door, you're immediately building your reputation, and it will matter later on down the road. Can you talk about some of the movements within DEA that you did?
Yep. So I was in Minneapolis for almost 6 years, and I had the opportunity to take a voluntary transfer, meaning the government didn't pay for my move. I found a vacancy back in Wichita. Back home, I thought it would be great to get our young kids back close to the grandparents, and so we paid for our own move and moved back to Wichita and did another, I think, 4 years, roughly 4 or 5 years in Wichita. But then the opportunity to promote came along, and I accepted a promotion up to Kansas City, bigger, 2.5 hours up the road, but a bigger metro. Just an opportunity to expand what I was doing in Minneapolis and Wichita, and just do it in a different environment. So went to Kansas City as a group supervisor. The thing about taking that promotion in DEA is now you're on a clock, and you only get to serve for a finite period of time in that first line leadership role until you have to take your mandatory, obligatory rotation into headquarters. So I knew at that time, when I took the Kansas City job, that my time to go into headquarters was coming. And it just so happened that as soon as my youngest graduated from high school and went off to college, now it was time for me to go to headquarters. So the timing worked out really, really well. I went to headquarters, and I got assigned to work in the Office of Professional Responsibility. It's internal affairs. I did that for about 1.5 years. I got another promotion in that same office, and then I figured that my timeline would last about another year there, but it just so happened that the senior leadership position in Kansas City, the ASAC, who covered the entire state of Kansas and the Western District of Missouri, was going to retire. And I thought, man, I'd be very well suited to go home and take that office over. And the career board agreed, and they moved me back to Kansas City. And I thought, this is probably where I'll finish my career. I did that for 3 years, roughly. And in the middle of COVID, the administrator, in the middle of COVID, my boss in St. Louis left, retired from the agency. And I thought, if I promoted one more time, then that could be the end of the line. I probably wouldn't have to move my family. Kansas City was the biggest office outside of the St. Louis division, and it's only a few hour trip up and down the highway. I could split my time between Kansas City and St. Louis. My kids were gone in college, and my wife could come with me if she wants. She could split time. I could split time. This would work great. I'd be the perfect fit for the St. Louis field division. Well, the administrator thought differently. He moved a senior executive service member from Houston to St. Louis, took my job. And then he made it worse by saying, Eric, if you want to be in the senior executive service, you're going to go take his spot in Houston. Like, what sense does that make?
Is that where you met Danny Comeaux?
I took the job that they offered me. I did not bite the hand that feeds me. I got sent to Houston, and that's where I first met Danny Comeaux.
Tell us about that, how you met and your early relationship, how that went. So
I first talked to him on the phone right after he was named the SAC of Houston. And I hadn't yet been named the SAC the deputy SAC in Houston, and I knew that he wanted somebody else. And then I got the job, and somebody else didn't get it. So I figured Danny would be a little bit miffed about that. And so, but I reached out and I called him and I said, sir, I'm looking forward to coming working for you in that division. Willing to follow your lead, do what you want, do what you need. I know I wasn't your pick, but I hope to make you proud. And I knew his career trajectory. I knew he had been, from Jackson, Mississippi, to Little Rock, to Los Angeles, to San Francisco. He had some big assignments, some pretty major assignments. And I knew a lot of people in his circle, but I'd never met him. And after we talked on the phone, he was very direct with me. Again, he acknowledged he didn't pick me, but he was committed to working with me. And, put your money where your mouth is. He lived up to that. He never, ever made me feel like I was his runner-up choice.
What was his reputation at that time that you had heard? Because, DEA is a large agency, but also it is small.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah. Well, I knew he was flamboyant and dynamic and energetic, and I knew he was a case maker. I had no idea what he was like as a boss, but I knew I was about to find out. And when I moved into Houston, it was instant trust, which I knew was unusual for him. He's not going to let people into his inner circle unless he thinks he can trust you, and he was very wary of outsiders. I'm guessing that has a lot to do with people who have burned him in the past. And but I was loyal to him. I protected his position, and he reciprocated. I felt that if I demonstrated competency and if I demonstrated fairness and loyalty, that he would give me wide latitude, and he did. On the outside, there were a lot of people who looked at that and said he was not engaged, that I was running the division, not him. But that's not the way that it worked.
He empowered you.
That's the thing is, if he would have come off to everybody else as I'm in charge here and I'm running the division, that would not have allowed me to flourish. It would not have allowed me to grow. And because he exercised leadership from the background, not visible and not out on Front Street. He pushed me into that role. He made me go meet with the chiefs in Houston. He made me go meet with the U.S. attorney in Beaumont in the Eastern District, and he made me, stand up and answer to the complaints down in Galveston, and he made me do the media appearances with the Houston networks. He was doing me a favor, and he was preparing me for the next step. Again, externally, people thought that meant he was not engaged. What he was doing was empowering me and preparing me.
And molding and letting you flourish and spread your wings as opposed to micromanaging. He's been here a little over a year now, and I could listen to him talk about leadership all day, and we've talked quite a bit on this show. And I love providing a platform because I can literally listen to that man talk about leadership, but there's always common elements of his style, and it is empowerment. He sits back and listen and learn, and he sized you up. You had to earn probably that trust and respect, just like anybody. Everybody's been burned by somebody, and I don't blame him. But he rewards the competency, and he rewards loyalty and hard work. Yeah. And he does. I really like that. And I'm glad that how long did it take for you to kind of figure that out? Like that style, that's what he was doing.
Man, it was almost immediate for me. Now, I'm probably a little bit more naive than most. I'm not maybe as wary as he might have been, but it started as just having a respect for his position, not necessarily him as the person occupying that position, but respect for his position. But then I also had respect for his experiences. I knew that he had been a cop in Houston. I knew that he had a difficult trajectory in each of his assignments. Just listening to him describe where he had been and what he had been through, I knew he had some difficult experiences. But then I also saw that he had an approach to networking, and that he placed value on being able to just leverage things like meeting with other people and talking with other people and hearing other people's perspectives, whether he agreed with them or not, whether they were inside DEA or outside DEA. And so he just had a different approach, right? He kind of hovered at 30,000 feet, and he he monitored me, he monitored our people, he monitored our attitudes, he monitored our work product, and he would pull levers and he would make connections and move chess pieces, as I like to say. He liked to play chess, not checkers. And at the same time, on the other end of that, I was a grinder. We were very different. Like, he was up here with all his machinations, and then I was out grinding. I wanted to know the minutia of every case. I wanted the minutia of how groups were organized. I wanted to know how money was being spent. I wanted to know, because for me, my style was, I thought having more information helped me make better decisions. And I studied and I prepared and I organized. And he'd laugh. He calls me a nerd. He's like, "You nerd, what are you doing? Like, just even getting ready for this." I told him I've been preparing for a couple of weeks. And he says, "You nerd, I'd just walk in there and talk off the cuff." So it's kind of funny.
He's out of line. I send him nice flows all the time and preparation, and he never reads it. I don't even bother anymore.
I'll just talk to you.
Yeah, he does good at it. But yeah, it's so funny. He is, I will say this, he has been consistent.
Yeah.
He's doing this in your interaction and your relationship with him from the start, and this is what he's doing here in Dallas.
Yeah. But there may be some outsiders that look at it differently. I'm betting that the majority of the folks on the inside of the police department, if they stopped, if they've not thought about it before, but they listen to this, I would almost guarantee that what I describe and what I experienced, you guys will experience it. You guys will see it. And if you just trust the process, you'll all be better for it, because he will, if you want to commit to being competent, technically competent, if you want to commit to doing the work, and if you will commit to following his lead, he will put you in positions that will allow you to flourish. He'll put the department in position that will allow the department to flourish.
Yeah, we've seen that. I mean, Dan here is his sergeant. He Comeaux sent his mole down here to listen in on this. Just kidding. But he is a sergeant. But yeah, it's funny. He literally texted me and said, "How's it going?" And right when his ears must have been burning, because he literally just texted, "How's it going?" and says, "Going good." He's actually talking about you. But no, I don't know. It's what you're describing is everything. It is everything we've already seen in a small little window of, and he's. I think it sounds like he's had a recipe that served him well for many years.
Yep.
And why change it? I will say from a chief standpoint for this city, I've worked for 7 of our 31 police chiefs in our history. He has made connections with the community that unlike any other chief that I've seen so far as support. Dallas is a big city. Dallas has a lot of wealth. I believe our city is great, not necessarily because of the city government. I believe it's great because of all of the philanthropists that are in the city that want to come out and help the first responder community. Because, there's other parts of the country that is not that way. Dallas is, and he has made the connections with the end goal is to make our department better and let the community have a stake in that.
Well, I think you'll see success in his recipe.
I'm excited. I'm excited to see where this goes.
Good.
2023. You retired in what rank?
I did. So I retired as an assistant administrator. I was the chief inspector. There were 4 or 5 principals that worked for the administrator and the deputy administrator, the chief of operations, the chief inspector, the chief of intelligence, so on and so forth. So I was one of those 5 principals in the inspection division. In 2022, there were kind of 3 distinct life changes that I thought, they seemed to align perfectly, that told me that it was time to find the next chapter. It was August of 2022. I hit my eligibility to retire. That's a big deal. I hit my KMA date. And that same month, my daughter got married. And so I flew back from D.C. to Kansas City for the wedding. And the day before the wedding, we're sitting there, and my son and his wife pull out their sonogram pics. And, man, it was just like, I'm eligible. both my kids are married, and I got a grandbaby on the way. And my wife said, that baby's due in March. I better be back in Kansas City by March. And so I knew I had about 6 months to plan my exit strategy. That 6 months went fast. It came much quicker than I thought it would. But, the baby was due in early March, and my lease on my apartment out there was up at the end of February. So either I renew my lease and she doesn't go back, or I let my lease go and she goes back by herself, and how's this going to work? And so we just took the plunge. We let our lease expire. We packed up everything and we moved it back to Kansas City. But I still worked for headquarters. So for the next 4 months, beginning in early March, I'd get up on Monday morning early and I'd catch a flight to DC, and I'd stay in an apartment out there until late Thursday, and I'd fly back and I'd work from home on Friday. And I did that every week for the next 4 months. And I looked at a lot of private sector stuff. Man, I hope none of it come through, because I just couldn't get excited about running security for John Deere or, doing internal compliance investigations for Wells Fargo, but I also knew that the superintendent of the Kansas Highway Patrol had announced his retirement, and he was going to be leaving in June. And I wanted that job.
Why did you want that job? Well, it was so appealing.
So you rewind 30-some years. When I had applied for the police department and the sheriff's department, I also applied for the highway patrol. And they said, no, you don't have enough life experience. You're too young. You're too green. We got too many other options. We're going a different direction. So I got my Dear John letter from the highway patrol. You fast forward through my career at the sheriff's department, and everything I did in some form or fashion had a nexus to the patrol. I talked about DUI enforcement.
Yeah.
The highway patrol is responsible for certifying all of the intoxilizers in the state and teaching the use of the intoxilizer to all law enforcement in the state. So I was familiar with the patrol there. I went through crash reconstruction with the patrol. In my motor assignment, I rode with a couple motor guys in the patrol. In my criminal interdiction efforts, the patrol would teach advanced criminal interdiction, and I would want to work next to those guys and learn from those guys. You go several years later, when I was the ASAC in Kansas City, and we were trying to put together a transportation and smuggling task force group. It was the troopers in Kansas who were knocking out interdiction on I-70. And so I worked with the superintendent of the highway patrol then to form a HIDA initiative that was comprised, we would fund it, and they would provide all the manpower for it. And so I knew the patrol. I knew how they operated. I also knew that, just from some of my friends within the patrol and some of our task force officers that worked over there from the patrol, I knew a lot about the culture and the dynamic within the patrol. And so when their superintendent announced his retirement, that's where I wanted to transition to. The problem is I didn't know anybody in the governor's office. That's a cabinet position appointed by the governor. I've been a lifelong member of the opposite party of the governor, and I didn't know how that was going to work out. But I was able to make a connection with her chief of staff, was able to kind of give my vision and my style and talk about my career. She called me back and interviewed me, and literally within the first conversation with the chief of staff until the time that I had a job offer in my hands, it was about 2 weeks. And so in late May of 2023, I knew I was going to have the job. I told the DEA in June that I was retiring at the end of June, and June 30th was my last day, and I took off the 4th of July, and I started at the Highway Patrol on the 6th of July, so had less than a week off.
You were appointed as a superintendent.
I was.
I want you to describe, I did a little, in your intro, which you have not heard yet, is a little history lesson in the Kansas Highway Patrol. It was formed in 1937. Can you talk about the size of that agency?
Sure. So we're 880 authorized positions. It's up to the superintendent to determine how many of those are sworn and how many of those are non-sworn. When I took over, there were 525 sworn positions. We've rebalanced that to 550 sworn positions, and then the remainder are professional staff, support staff, non-sworn positions. We are divided up geographically into 8 host troops. Host troops are, your bread and butter road warriors, the road troopers. There are 7 distinct regional offices plus the Kansas Turnpike Authority. So those are the 8. Then there's another 15 troops, specialty troops, your motor carrier troops and your traffic safety and professional standards and fleet operations and your SRT guys and your canine and helicopter and all the aircraft services, the Governor's Protection Detail, the Capitol Police. So 23 troop commands in the state of Kansas, 7 bureau commands, and then an assistant superintendent and me.
How proud are you to take over this organization?
Oh, it was like never in my wildest dreams, but the fact that it happened, so thankful. I'm blessed. I'm proud to have a part in the history of the organization. I'm committed to doing everything that I can do in the short amount of time that I have to leave a lasting impact. My assistant superintendent, when we graduate a class twice a year, one of his messages to the recruits is, you've got a long time here, but you're going to look back and it's not going to seem like it's a long time. Every day, you've got to figure out how to make this pace better when you leave than today. The day that you got here, you want it to be better when you leave. And that resonates with me. I know appointments come and go. Governors come and go. We've got an election coming this fall. I may or may not get reappointed. And so I may have the rest of this calendar year to leave an impact. I may have another term after that to make an impact. It doesn't really matter. That's the nature of the business. If I'm gone in January of 2027, I want the Highway Patrol to be better than it was in July of 2023.
With that being said, I want to give you the opportunity to give a sales pitch to anybody that might be looking to join your great organization. What would you tell them as a superintendent, as a leader of this large organization? What would you tell them out there that may be on the fence about applying with y'all?
Well, I would say, first of all, that if you're committed to public service, this is a good place to consider. If you're committed to law enforcement being your brand of public service, look no further. But I would also say it's not for everyone, because it's not easy. It's a grind. It can be a high-stress environment. It can be a boring, monotonous, low-stress environment. And it can jump back and forth between those two so very quickly. The thing that's different about the Highway Patrol, and I always want to make sure that I emphasize that we're not better. We're just different. And the thing that's different is the way that we prepare. You have to be exposed to high-stress situations. And that's what our academy is like. The academy is not easy. A lot of people come to our academy with no law enforcement experience at all, and they say, wow, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. It's not for me. There's a lot of people that come to our academy from other law enforcement agencies, and they're already certified cops. They've been through an academy, and they say, nah, this is not what I thought. This is not for me. That's fine. But if you're looking for something that isn't easy, but instead it's meaningful, but that also provides you opportunities for growth, opportunities to do things that you'll not have in some of these other departments, if you're looking to be challenged, if you're looking to be treated with value and with fairness. My niece spoke at a graduation here in Southwest Missouri not too long ago, and she said something in that speech that resonated with me. It's not essentially what she said was that your value is really rooted in who you belong to. And now she was saying that more in a religious connotation, but there's truth in what she's saying. Your value is in who you belong to. If you want to belong to the Kansas Highway Patrol, you're going to find value. You're going to increase in your value, but you're also going to add value to the organization. You're going to add value to the state. You're going to add value to the citizens. If that's what you're looking for, come to the Kansas Highway Patrol.
I will say I see your recruiting posters and the travel stops along the KT, and they got me pretty hooked. I was like, man, that's a fine-looking organization right there. So
yeah, we're pretty proud of everything that the agency has accomplished since 1937. We're coming up on our 95th anniversary next year. We're going to celebrate that. A lot of men and women who have come before us They've sacrificed a lot to get the agency in the posture that it is. I take that seriously. You don't want to squander that, don't want to tarnish any of that. And, 95 years from now, I want people to look back and say, this was a pivot point. This was where a new era of doing things kind of originated, and I think it'll make people proud.
I want to ask you about the line of duty death team and the creation of that and the importance to you. I mean, I think I have an idea after listening to your story.
Yeah.
But can you talk about that unit and why you created it?
So here's another example, just an ironic example of somebody kind of testing you to see what you're all about, to see if you can put your money where your mouth is. I hadn't been the superintendent for 6 months, maybe less. And the executive director of the Kansas Sheriff's Association, very powerful organization in law enforcement, but also in politics. The executive director asked me, he said, you know what, we've got a couple of guys in the state that work in law enforcement, and they're the only two, they're like the go-to guys for a line of duty death funeral, and they have to do it on their own. And there's no organization, there's no sponsorship, and I think it would be fantastic if the state of Kansas would organize and sponsor that. And I think it would even be more important if the Kansas Highway Patrol did that. Would you do that? And I said, yeah, I agree. That's important. It shouldn't fall on two guys to be the go-to. It shouldn't. These ceremonial honors that we talked about when you see a cop funeral, the big cities shouldn't have the corner on that. It shouldn't just be the big cities and the big counties that get that recognition and get that ceremony. We need to standardize this across the state. I agreed with him. So the first thing that I did was, I actually saw a chief out in Colorado speak at an IACP conference in San Diego about line of duty death protocols. And so I contacted this chief, and he put me in touch with the Colorado Fallen Heroes Foundation. And it's some Denver area cops, Colorado State Patrol troopers, some retirees, and I invited them to come to Wichita and put on a one-day session talking about what your foundation and what your organization looks like, how they function, and how can we take what these two guys do on an ad hoc basis and what you guys have done and kind of grow the way you have grown. So in January of 2025, we hosted the Colorado Fallen Heroes Foundation. They came to Wichita. They put on this one-day program, and we initiated training shortly thereafter to kind of model their program. June 2025, I host a training session up in the Kansas City area for our organization. It was fledgling. We have an org chart that kind of breaks down all of the different aspects of a line of duty death funeral, from like who is your agency liaison, who is your peer support liaison, who is your venue liaison, who's your traffic control liaison, who's your benefits man. Like, we've got it broken down into an org chart. Now we've got to staff that. We've got to find volunteers from each of the associations. Like, this isn't a highway patrol operation. We're just sponsoring it, we're organizing it, and we're gonna push it out to the state. But we can't do it alone. So this training session in June, we had identified people to kind of fill all of those top line leadership positions, and then start finding their staff of volunteers. Who's gonna do honor guard? Who's gonna do flyovers? Who in the state do we have with a horse patrol? And they're gonna organize their resources. So in the event we need to get called together, I'm telling you what, that training session in Kansas City was June. I want to say June 17th, 2025. 11 days later, we had a line of duty death. And the sheriff that was sitting next to me that was agreeing to be the agency liaison for any sheriff, hey, Scott, got a sheriff's deputy in northwest Kansas killed in the line of duty. And he was an hour away, and he spent the next week and a half on the ground. We didn't know what we were doing. We were winging it, but now it's live. And I will tell you, so that was like June, I want to say the 28th, give or take a day, 2025. And over the next 90 days, we had 4. And 2 of those were in the Kansas City metro area. A lot of support, big agencies, a lot of resources. Our team didn't get used a great deal, but the other two were in northwest Kansas, rural communities, rocked everyone's world. The reason why we do what we do is because in Phillipsburg, Kansas, population less than 1,000, we had funerals, had no capacity for. We put on a funeral service that was comparable to any major metro. In fact, we had cops from New York City in Phillipsburg, Kansas, giving this deputy what he deserved, because now we had resources to support small rural Kansas. That's what the executive director asked for. That's what we were able to produce.
And you talk about taking all of your many experiences in this, going back to that first police funeral, how it made you feel, and you in that power, the representation, and the respect that you want to give that officer and that family. And now in 2025, you took a lot of your own experiences of what you've gone through, and you made something. You know, we're all planting trees that we won't see the shade of.
Yep.
You're putting things in place that could be, because sadly there will be other line of duty deaths. This is for them. This is for their families.
Yep.
And it's crucial.
It is. And there's an analogy here to be made too. It's what I learned, why this is important. What I learned about grief is that, and again, this goes back to some DEA and some KHP analogies that I've already made in this program. But what I learned about grief is that it's the same lesson that I learned about being a reliable partner. You got to show up. You got to do what you say you're going to do. You've got to stay until it's finished. And you have to do it every time, regardless of how hard it is, because the foundation for processing grief is trust, right? And you can't build trust if you don't do the hard stuff first.
I really would like to offline get with you on this, what you've created, take a look at it for our department. I think that we sadly we've had a lot of loss and grief here in this city, but we could always do things better. And I would really like to see what y'all got going, because it sounds pretty incredible.
Be happy to share it. One of the other things that we're pretty proud of, doing the work and finding people to do the work. While it's not easy, it's probably the easy part. How do you financially support that? There's no department that's going to write the check for everything. It's not fair to the agencies. It's not fair to the taxpayers. But there are foundations that stand behind these. We needed a foundation to stand behind this and financially support this. Well, there was already a foundation that existed, and it was to create and maintain the law enforcement memorial, the state one that's on the grounds of the State House. And they had been in existence for a couple of decades, and they had amassed a lot of money, and they'd put a lot of investment into this fabulous memorial on State House grounds. But they had kind of reached the end of their useful life cycle. Like, now what? Well, it just so happened that now we have a mission. And so we approached the Memorial Foundation and asked them if they would adopt our cause as one of their charter missions as well. So they amended their bylaws. They adopted our cause into their charter. They formed an LLC. They've been raising money. It's in less than 60 days, they've got close to $100,000 raised to support this line of duty death and funeral assistance team when they have to deploy. There are automatic approved delegated spending authority guidelines that are in place that say, if you got to go, take care of this. So relatively new. It's in its infancy. It's growing, but there's so much support when you can gather the resources and organize the resources. There's so many people that want to support what our men and women are doing, and in the unfortunate circumstance when they have to pay the ultimate price, we want to be there for them, and we're building that.
That is how you lay a foundation.
Yeah.
Speaking of foundation, I do want to give the opportunity. We're getting close to the sunset of this episode, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk about your rock. your family.
Yep. Be married 32 years this year. Kind of a humorous way that we met. I was walking out of church one Sunday morning with my girlfriend when I looked off to my left and I saw my wife. So made a decision to move on from the relationship that I was in. I was in the academy at the time. I was gonna be sheriff's deputy very soon. And our first date was probably within 10 days of my academy graduation. Been together ever since. So she has, obviously, as I've talked about already, she has sacrificed a lot to support me. She's sacrificed a lot to move around the country with me. I think that it's made us closer because every time that we've moved, wherever we land, initially it's just us. Now I've got a son who's 30, married, 2 kids. My grandkids, he's a partner in a law firm in Kansas City. I've got a daughter who's also an attorney at a major firm in Kansas City, married to a brilliant young man. We are fortunate enough to be able to live probably within 10 to 15 minutes of everyone. My wife and I love for our house to kind of be the epicenter of everything. Whenever they want to come over, they're welcome. If we need to keep the kids, we keep the kids. Everybody's got dogs. If we need to babysit the dogs, I've had 5 dogs in my bed at night. We love it. That's our peaceful place, as chaotic as it sounds.
It's home.
It's what we want. It's what we tried to build. It's what we live for. So, very blessed.
It's a legacy.
Yeah. I hope so.
So I read a quote from your bio. The foundation of wellness or well-being in any organization starts with the leadership dynamic. If it is fake or lacking, the foundation crumbles. A fair, supportive, inclusive, and transparent culture can still be firm and demanding, but people gravitate towards that and produce because of it. Tell us the importance of taking a genuine, proactive approach to well-being of the people that you send out every day to serve the great state of Kansas.
The approach that I took, particularly when I became the superintendent, there were a lot of times where I had leadership assignments prior in my career, and I only owned a segment, really, of something larger. This is the first time where the entire agency, the entire enterprise, everything is my responsibility. It's got to be my baby. And so my approach coming into an agency that, in listening to them, there are, and let me back up just a little bit before I dive too deep into this, because there are a multitude of leadership styles. If you study leadership on any level, there's often like between 4 and 6 styles that are described, right? There's transformational leadership, delegative leadership, authoritative leadership, transactional, participative, servant leadership. There's all these different labels. And I think some of those I'm inclined to be a little stronger in, and some of those I'm a complete failure in. That's not my strong suit. But I think the most important thing to do is to understand which situation requires which style and become adaptive. And so there's 3 of those that I feel like best suit me. It's a hybrid approach. And so coming into the Kansas Highway Patrol, I wanted to try to understand what the agency needs. Understanding what someone needs is really the crux of servant leadership. Then when you understand what they need, you have to articulate a vision. Here's where we are now. Here's where I want us to be. And when you articulate that vision, that's really transformational leadership. Now, how do you execute on that vision? I want to influence people. I want to be at the front, and I want people to follow me as we go about to achieve that vision. That's kind of an authoritative style of leadership. It's not authoritarian, where I'm the boss, you must do what I say. It's authoritative. That means, guys, here's where we're going. Follow me. Let's go. So, again, when I came to the Highway Patrol, I wanted to figure out what the agency needed. The first thing that I thought was a reset on morale. Poor morale in my view, is often mistaken for not meeting the wants or the needs or the desires of one person, right? You go to a guy who's disgruntled and you say, you got a morale problem. What's the issue? Well, I didn't get this. I didn't get that. I wanted this. You did that. That's not poor morale. That's selfishness. Poor morale exists because you haven't taken care of the agency as a whole. So I wanted to know what the agency needed. The agency thought that the agency had a morale problem. And so what I wanted to demonstrate was, what if meeting the needs of this one selfish, disgruntled person, what if I do what they want? What if I give them does that improve morale? No, that's actually going to negatively affect everybody else, because that's not what the whole needs. What if giving them something that they want in a contract negotiation weakens our ability to deliver public safety services? So what is the antidote for poor morale? I needed to understand what the agency needed. So I went around and I met with everybody, the entire rank and file, statewide, multi-state, multi-stop tour, and I listened. But that's not enough, because you got to put your money where your mouth is. If I come back next year to have the same multi-stop, statewide whirlwind tour, and I asked you to tell me what you needed last year and you haven't seen any results, what are you going to tell me this year? Nothing. So you've got to be willing to address all of those problems and demonstrate that you're willing to make hard decisions, hard choices, and work hard and grind on their behalf. You got to do it with energy. You got to do it with enthusiasm, because that's infectious. Energy and enthusiasm is infectious. Positive attitudes, trust, the belief that we're all interested in the same outcome, that was a natural remedy for low morale. You listen, you build trust, and you execute. Morale will take care of itself. And so that dialogue that I have with them, and I still do it on multiple levels. I write a quarterly column in the Troopers Association magazine. That's for the union folks. I write a quarterly column for our agency bulletin. I put out a weekly report of what my office is doing on their behalf. They don't get to see a lot at the rank and file level of what goes on up in the Puzzle Palace. They need to. They need to understand that we're grinding on their behalf. So I put out a weekly bulletin on what we're doing in headquarters on behalf of the agency. I still go annually and meet with all of the rank and file at the troop level. I follow those up with meetings, private meetings with the first and second line supervisors. Twice a year, we have a captain's roundtable, so all of the captains can get on the same page as the majors and the bureau commanders. We have a weekly executive staff meeting every Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, the minutes and the notes are posted on a Teams channel for all the troop commanders. Transparency builds trust, but so does executing. You got to be competent, but you got to execute. That builds trust, and that solves morale problems. That dialogue is productive. We've routinely disagreed on a lot of issues, but when we disagree from a place where we're not attacking others or questioning each other's motives, I think everybody has an understanding that at the end of the day, the decision is mine. It's my responsibility. If I've got to roll it back, dial it back, if I've got to undo a decision because it was the wrong one, everybody knows I'll do it. Not too proud to fail, not afraid to make mistakes. But again, all of that builds trust, and that improves morale. So I feel like my approach is to always be productive. I've got a saying that I know annoys people. It's foot on the gas. Why put off till tomorrow what you can do today? I know I wear people out with that, but I want to be proactive. And the other thing too, as we close and talk about the legacy of the agency, my last boss at DEA right before I retired, the deputy administrator, he used to have a saying. He would encourage people to just polish the badge. Polish the badge. Well, I got to thinking about that after he said that in an open conference one time. Like, what does that mean? Polish the badge. I've met with each recruit in the academy as they come through since I've started, and I take that a step further. Polishing the badge, to me, isn't just keep your conduct in check, keep your behavior professional so that you don't tarnish the badge. There's plenty of ways proactively to tarnish the badge, right? But what if you do nothing? What happens to that brass lamppost out on the front of your garage over the years when you do nothing? It tarnishes. You didn't have to screw up. You didn't have to make a mistake. You didn't have to get arrested. You didn't have to beat your wife or get a DUI to tarnish the badge. Those newspaper articles that show up with a cop in the headline tarnish the badge. But what about all you people out here who think that you're going to take shortcuts and cut corners and phone it in, and you're not doing nothing? What's going to happen to your badge? What's going to happen to the brass when you do nothing? It's going to tarnish. Polishing the badge is a proactive verb. You've got to work at it every single day. And so it'll tarnish if you disrespect it. It'll tarnish it if you do nothing. You have to proactively work to make it shine. And so that's my message to all the young guys. Excellence, it's infectious. The right people are drawn to it for the right reasons. And if we lose a few along the way, that's okay too.